This is Selena Yvette, host of Stories from Planet Earth. Thanks for listening to the following show on Public House Media.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another No Filter Friday on Public House Media. And today I'm sitting here with Ryan Soscia, who runs Jane Doe. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad we finally got this together. We've been talking about it for like a while. So walk me through this Jane Doe situation. How did you come to be in this? It's not really a business. It's more of space.
Yeah, so the short version of the story is I grew up in Connecticut, in a small town of Mystic, Connecticut, and ended up going to high school in DC. And when I went back to Connecticut one summer before my senior year, I went to work in a family friend's law firm and helped represent plaintiffs of abuse. And over the 2-month internship, we helped settle a case on behalf of a woman in her 40s who was suing her parents for childhood abuse, and we won. So I really learned a lot about, the grounds on which individuals have to pursue legal action through that internship, as well as, what actually is going on in some cases behind closed doors. Fast forward to the end of this internship, and I actually had a close friend of mine who's going off to play D1 football at Penn State, basically break down one afternoon, tell me that he had been molested by a cross fitness trainer. And,
Oh, wow.
I just, felt like I needed to help my friend and, encourage him to do something about it, being as, none of us were in this community in Connecticut anymore. And, how else would you go about making sure that this individual doesn't do it to others, especially when I had learned keenly and become keenly aware of over that internship that most offenders are, in fact, repeat offenders. So long story short, in 24 hours from my friend, speaking about what happened to him, we found 10 others who had the same incident by the same perpetrator. And really that was, the moment that shocked me the most, where it's really just transformed the situation from one of tremendous shame and stigma to finding out that there were others, and then now unanimous consent to pursue action against the perpetrator. And from my perspective as an outsider in that, whole ordeal, I was just looking at my friends that I had grown up with since kindergarten, and here were 10 guys that trust was literally optimal, and it took 10 of them to be impacted by this perpetrator before one was even, willing to speak up. And, after seeing what happened when they realized that they were all connected, I fundamentally, saw that there was a change in narrative for them, as well as I started to understand a little bit over, the time with the internship at the law firm, what the value would mean for a law firm who, would be trying to take on a case of this nature. So I really just from an early age, understood the value to both parties of identifying these connections early on, and wanted to do something to help catalyze those connections. Fast forward to college, though, I basically learned that the advice I gave my friends was really good advice, and that I hadn't taken it for myself.
As most of us do.
Yeah, exactly. And the short version of this is that I was sexually abused by one of my best friend's older brothers growing up, and I spoke up about it once and was told, my brother would never do that to anyone. So I just really felt like, based on my personal experience and based on, the experience with a ton of my friends, I felt uniquely positioned to, develop this technology. And I wondered, who else might do it if I didn't step up to the plate and just get it done. So it all really started there, going back to high school.
That's a good place to start. And it's certainly a good story, because that's something that I found in, my spending the last, 3+ years. No, longer than that now, probably closer to 4 or 5 years interviewing survivors of sex crimes around the world, is that they're never the only victim of somebody. It's always it's a course, it's a pattern of behavior. It's a course of conduct that
Totally.
either rapists or molesters or, whatever, like they do the same thing over and over again. And that's how I found, if you interview these people individually, even if they don't know each other, they'll tell you the same pattern of events. So, and for a legal perspective, like that is like a proven course of conduct is like invaluable to a case, especially a big one.
Yeah, definitely. And a prime example of those connections is like when, backlogged rape kits get sequenced and then they compare all the sequenced rape kits amongst themselves. And oftentimes they're finding 50% hit rates for repeat offenders. So with our technology, we're essentially doing the same thing with digital DNA in another light. I guess you could think of it like that.
Oh, absolutely. Because, a pattern's a pattern, whether it be physically or metaphorically.
Agreed.
Okay, so when somebody wants to report, like what is the process like that for Jane Doe?
Yeah, so essentially someone can go to jado.io, so it's jdoe.io, or download the app by searching Jado or various other keywords in the App Store. It's available for free everywhere in the US for iOS and Android. We're expanding to 155 different countries this year. But essentially, you download this app, you create an account, you click the plus icon in the top right-hand corner, and we'll ask you minimal details about the report, but nevertheless important details about what happened, whether you experienced or witnessed it, where it happened, when, as well as various identifiers for the perpetrator, him or herself. So we ask for like the name of the perpetrator, phone number. You could give us some social media links, maybe list the workplace of the perpetrator. And all of these will be filed as an anonymous report on our system that neither defames the perpetrator nor could even be subpoenaed from our platform. So I think the real story about our technology is that anonymous reporting isn't a new concept, but what we've built is something that could be placed even in a country with the most oppressive regime, and there's nothing that that regime could do to, undermine these reports on our system. It's totally anonymous and secure, even from us as a company. And we did that on purpose to essentially, reduce the downside to filing a report. I also just wanted to mention that, like, we encourage folks, whether it happened, today or 70 years ago in the past, to consider filing a report because the statute of limitations are constantly changing in different states. And really, like, you don't even have to have a desire to connect with a law firm necessarily. Over 65% of our users are, but oftentimes folks will put a report in thinking that they just want to document it, they don't want to think about it, only to find out down the road that more people have reported the same perpetrator. And going back to the story with my friends, it really changes the narrative once you realize, as someone who thinks that they're alone, realizing that you're not. It gives you a much more powerful voice to and a lot more confidence to pursue, civil action together against an abuser rather than doing so individually.
Absolutely. And that just the emotional side of it to know, because sex crimes are such an isolating thing. It makes the victim feel
Mm-hmm.
so completely alone and so isolated and so on the outside. But when they figure out that they've got more of them, and more often than not, plenty of them to go to go after the person, or to even, to speak to, you know, filing reports of things that happened, ages ago.
Mm-hmm.
Even if your statute of limitations is out, doesn't mean it's out on somebody else. Like you could still end up aiding in somebody else's case
Totally,
from, you know, a
totally,
witness standpoint.
totally. And yeah, I mean, I just like to add that, like, we often tell folks that, like, this technology provides a tremendous amount of both emotional as well as practical strength in court, emotional strength, because, you know, if you're reporting something from a while ago, like, it can be a very cathartic experience to get this off your chest, to put it in the system, to know that you have complete control and ownership over your report and where it ultimately goes. Down the road, it could be the case that we end up, allowing folks to share reports with law enforcement. We ultimately want to provide various options for survivors to decide what they want to do with their story. But nevertheless, even if they do nothing, it can still be imperative to a case just because of the repeat offender identification, algorithm.
Absolutely. And it's like, once everybody, enough people get together to stop somebody from having their next victim or their next victim or their next victim, because they're going to keep going. Every
Totally.
single time they get away with it, they're empowered to do it even more.
Totally. And even in the schools type of setting, if a teacher gets in trouble for sexual misconduct, there's this, common term called passing the trash, which is, the head of school writing a glowing recommendation for this perpetrator just to get him off the campus. And, meanwhile, he's negligently passing the perpetrator to a different university in a different
For a
state
fresh
where,
crop of victims.
yeah, and without this type of technology that can track perpetrators, across the entire U.S. or eventually this year across the entire world, it's incredibly difficult to keep track of all of that.
Absolutely, especially from a global standpoint. Like a big goal of No Filter Friday that I'm actively working on constantly is connecting the Me Too movements across the world. I've talked to Me Too India, I've talked to Me Too Ethiopia, I've talked to Me Too Germany, like
That's
trying to
incredible.
get get to everybody on the same page, because as far as I can tell, nobody's communicating. It's
Yeah.
just like localized in all these different places. So let's talk about how you're going to get JDO global, because that's the world as a whole that we live in.
Yeah, so as of right now, our iOS app can be downloaded in about 156 different countries, but we're working on the functionality to make sure it's truly robust in all of these different regions. It's a pretty simple process compared to what I thought it would be. But I guess the biggest barrier to entry for other technology companies is, dealing with GDPR compliance or any of these new, privacy standards. With a system that we built, though, we often joke and say, like, if Facebook had done with their data what we do with ours, they never would have ended up testifying in front of Congress, because essentially,
If
like,
only.
we don't sell or use users' data, in a malicious way. Like, all the data is protected even from us. Like, it's owned and controlled by the users, and our system, just enables, what needs to happen. Nothing beyond that. But yeah, so recently we teamed up with some multinational law firms, hopefully having some press releases in the next couple of weeks with that. But yeah, they are in various countries around the world, and it's not a matter of if they want it; it's a matter of how quickly we can get JADO to the rest of the world. So
Get it rolled out. Well, if you want to go on a rollout tour, I will go with you. This will be amazing. So
I'm down.
speaking of which, though, how have you been getting the word out about it domestically, like within North America?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it honestly, I don't know, a lot of people think that we must have a very sizable advertising budget, but the reality is we've almost spent nothing on advertising. A lot of early traffic was, word of mouth. In the past few years, we've had just a tremendous amount of press. We've been on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt and Kate Snow, New York
Good one.
Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, just tons of, articles flooding the web with our technology, and that's been really great for helping folks to become more aware of it. I mean, we've also had the great fortune of these incredible movements, and when we had first started, these weren't necessarily on the horizon. So, it really just it became something that we could have never predicted that timing, and definitely we've benefited from helping to amplify these movements and being a part of them. So yeah, a lot of that stuff. But the other thing is we team up with various high profile civil activists and survivors who speak on these topics around the world, or around the country mostly, um, really as a full-time job. So Brenda Tracy, for example, she's a gang rape survivor from Oregon State University, and she speaks at about 180 universities a year, speaking to athletics groups, entire athletics departments, faculty, Greek life. So she has a very large audience, and as she's raising awareness about these issues and sharing her story, with the athletes and all that good stuff, she also uses JADO as a call to action at the end of these types of engagements. So we've been really fortunate to have identified some really, I don't know, I like to think of them as on a trajectory that few others are, various high-profile civil activists and survivors who can help us, bridge the gap between a technology that exists that can genuinely positively impact a survivor's life and getting into the hands and downloaded by these folks. So yeah, it's been a continuous process, but so far
Lots of
so
good
good.
organic growth in there.
Yeah, definitely. And again, like we've almost spent nothing on advertising to date, so I feel like we're doing something right. This year alone, we're anticipating having over 10,000 reports on the platform, which I think will be game changing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that those reports have to happen at all, but if they do, I suppose it might as well be on Jado.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
if there's anything we can do to help address underreporting, like that's ultimately the goal of our technology is to take crimes that are reported, 1 in 10 times and make them reported 1 in 3 or 1 out of 1 times. Like if you think about murder as a crime, like it's not the case that it doesn't get reported. Like it gets reported almost every time. But with these crimes, it's very different. So by eliminating the downside to filing a report, our goal is ultimately to increase those rates, ideally to 1 in 1.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like I feel like such a broken record constantly talking about that, but
Yeah.
yeah, like I always say that like sex crimes from the perpetrator standpoint are like the perfect crime to commit because like your victim doesn't want to talk about it. Nobody around your victim wants to talk about it. Like if bank robberies was like that,
Yeah,
there
like
wouldn't be
we would
any
have,
banks left.
yeah. And I just think it's tragic. Like when we first started Jado, from my perspective, the real world was genuinely failing survivors. And like, um, I totally lost my train of thought with this. One sec.
It's okay.
um,
If bank robberies were the same and nobody wanted to talk about
okay.
it, you
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah,
need it.
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. So from my perspective, like the real world was genuinely failing survivors, and the thing I'm trying to say is about solvability. The real world
Yeah.
is failing survivors, and when I looked at these crimes from like a research perspective, they were totally solvable, and it was incredibly tragic that it wasn't being solved. So, if you could increase reporting rates given the nature of these crimes, it's like literally these crimes are the perfect matchmaking system in the sense that most perpetrators are known by name to the victims and most perpetrators are repeat offenders. So the fact that it's underreported, at 1 in 10, like that's the rate. It's tragic that that's the case because if reporting rates could even increase modestly, you'd have an exponential capacity to identify repeat offenders. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's just I feel like society views these issues through a lens of stigma, but to me, it was like very clear how solvable this was. And, if you bundle a solution in technology and, enable it to solve this problem for one person, you could scale that to 1 billion people. So to me, it was always about, how could we leverage technology to address this? And after digging into the research, after, being frustrated based on my personal experience or, based on my experience, with my friends and in the firm, it really just stood out to me as the clear way to moneyball the civil and criminal justice system is to increase reporting rates, and everything else will follow. So,
Absolutely. So, because it's really hard, like, even if you do go to the police and be like, this person did X, Y, and Z to me, you're going to get grilled up one side and down the other. Um, but if you can bundle some of these cases and be like, see, we have a pattern, we have a perpetrator, we have all of these things, when you do take that to the police, or when survivors that have used JADO take that to the police, um, are the police, at least in North America, are they required to act upon this? Like, are they mobilized by all of these reports together?
yeah, so right now we're not working with law enforcement yet, but we've had various conversations and there's definitely a lot of interest. I think that the main point is that law enforcement sees our technology as something that could help them increase their prosecution rates. So, maybe a case that, just fell short of being successful from a criminal justice perspective, if there were additional plaintiffs or additional victims of the perpetrator and they had just been connected to this, to this pursuit of justice a little bit earlier on, or at all, that could have a game-changing implication for whether or not the perpetrator is behind bars. So, in the same
Oh,
sense that we can enhance, civil litigation through the connections that we find in enabling survivors to pursue justice together, the same thing applies, when survivors could use this to pursue criminal action as well.
Absolutely. Well, I met with the city attorney of Los Angeles, I don't know, a few months ago, and they said that their biggest fear, going forward with cases is that it's a pretty, like, they feel like it's a solid case, and then they get there, they get to trial, and the perpetrator walks free. And they said that that's what scares them the most, because then they're super emboldened and they feel like they can do nothing wrong and literally nothing will happen to them. So
Yeah.
there, these cases that are like even 70%, 80% of the way in the bag, the city attorney, at least in Los Angeles, is even nervous to take them, and it's like, I don't know, because they need 100% to really
Yeah.
take down a perpetrator.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, any additional edge you can get, I'd say, is, meaningful. So hopefully our
Absolutely.
technology can help to be that, especially from a criminal perspective, although we're not there yet. The other thing that's kind of interesting is, thinking about these patterns and what we're doing to identify them. Once we have enough data, like bringing artificial intelligence into the mix and, potentially finding patterns that typical humans would have missed, in terms of these crimes or in terms of being able to identify individuals as repeat offenders. I think that, there's this initial sprint for us, which is the technology working without using data science to its advantage. But there's also another sprint, once we get to a certain point in terms of usage and the data we have, where we'll actually be able to start leveraging advances in artificial intelligence to help to catalyze these things and make better cases as a result.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is a question that I get asked all the time, so that of course I have to pass it on to my guest
Yeah,
because it's part of the discussion, right? So we're
yeah.
living in a Me Too era. The toothpaste does not go back in the tube. Um, where do you see, with your experience and with your piece of technology, where do you see the future of hashtag Me Too going and impacting the world?
Yeah, so I think that Me Too is definitely here to stay, and I think that um, it's really just something that is going to continue to grow, like a positive fungi that just keeps spreading across the Amazon or something. But in any case, I think that the future of Me Too is going to be um, a lot less activism and a lot more, leveraging the forces of capitalism to ensure that this is the case now. Part of what we're seeing with like the big private equity firms, think of like BlackRock, they have a CEO who basically is like, hey, we manage, trillions of dollars of wealth. And if we have a decision to invest in a company that's doing good for society or the same company that's just caring about profits, and they're on the same playing field, like we're going to invest in the socially good one. In the M&A world, we're starting to see stuff along the lines of, Me Too provisions within companies. So think of a buyer
It's
of
amazing.
another company, asking the seller, like, hey, I want to know how many cases you've settled. I want to know the misconduct inside your corporation. I recently read a study that said $111 billion of M&A dollars were involved in Me Too reps. So I'm hoping that there will be a lot more fiscal incentive for companies to do the right thing. And I mean, some other things that we're seeing are, Uber with their transparency report, and I'm sure Lyft will follow shortly with that. But I think at the end of the day, the thing that they're really missing in that report is like they need to address underreporting. Whether it's a technology company or a big corporation, everyone needs to focus on underreporting. And so long as we can alleviate that, and you genuinely care about transparency, all of the good results that, are predictably solvable to this problem will come. But I think that between, the Me Too provisions that I was just mentioning, sometimes referenced as Weinstein clauses in M&A, in addition, us, like as a company, being able to help survivors literally sue companies or sue individuals for sexual misconduct in a civil, context. I think all of these things are ways of looking at the dynamics of capitalism with respect to the growing movements and activism in society, and really finding a nice synergy between the two. Like as a company, we are not a nonprofit; we're a for-profit, socially good entity, and we're unique in that nature because we can actually prioritize our social mission above our financials, and stakeholders can't actually get mad at us. If we lost all of our money in pursuit of the mission. Other companies, on the other hand, only have a fiscal bottom line. But we're starting to see just like a big shift in terms of the people with capital caring more and doing things that are putting money at stake in order to see the change that we as a society want to see. So
Totally. And at the other side of that too, like when, the word gets out about that, like perpetrators will hopefully think twice before doing these things, especially in like a workplace environment. Like, oh, I work at this company. If I do X, Y, and Z, it's going to get reported and I'm going to get in trouble and it's going to be terrible. So let me just
totally.
not.
Totally, exactly. And we often say too, like if JADO's ubiquitous on a college campus, then, you know, we think that perpetrators are going to think twice about, whether or not they can get away with something like this. I fundamentally believe that we're entering an era as society where repeat offenders are just statistically, they're going to get caught much, much faster. You could look
The
at
days are
evidence of that as the Golden State Killer, where they use 23andMe or whatever to identify him with like the daughter's DNA. Just a lot of new technologies are making it incredibly easy to identify those patterns early on. And I just think that moving forward, like we're eventually going to hit a point where you can't get away with things if you're a repeat offender in many contexts, whether that's fraud, sexual misconduct, or whatever. I think that the patterns are more easily recognizable and things are more
totally. And
transparent.
if they're trackable on a global scale, there's nowhere to run. We're going to go the moon,
Yeah,
you know?
maybe if you're Elon Musk, maybe if you're Elon Musk.
Maybe. It's like, I got a spaceship. I'll be all right.
Yeah, I got a Tesla up there too. I'll be fine.
I'll be just fine. He'll be fine. He'll always be fine. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on No Filter Friday. You have such an awesome, interesting piece of technology, and hopefully it will bring some hope and light to the people out there that definitely can benefit from it.
Yes, thank you so much. And if anyone like wants to reach out and ask more questions about Jado, I guess they can feel free to email me at ryan@jado.io. I pretty much respond to everything, so happy to field questions or concerns, or if people just want to say hi, whatever. Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. All right. That's wonderful. I'm so glad that you're so free with your email. It's so much easier.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know too many people who are, but I know Mark Cuban's like very, very like that as well. I
Out
actually
there with
cold emailed. Yeah, yeah. I actually did a podcast years ago and was talking about Mark Cuban and was encouraged to reach out to him. And long story short, I've been like in contact with him over the last several years about Jado, and it's just
That's
funny
amazing.
how accessible some people are and how inaccessible others are.
It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
All right, well, that is enough No Filter Friday for this week. Thank you for all coming by. Check out other shows on Public House Media like Choose to Rise or Confessions of a Military Spouse or Your Life Matters. See you all next week. Bye, 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 bye.